By watching or listening to this show, you are acknowledging that you are of legal age to purchase and consume cannabis in your region. This production is for adults only. Welcome to the Cannabis 101 podcast, part of the Cannabis Life Experience. Your guide through the legalization and consumption of cannabis in Canada and beyond. Join us on this journey and adventure with the wonderful plant. Here's your host, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to episode 81, hour number one of the Cannabis 101 podcast. My name is Dean Millard, and it's not just about getting high, it's about getting healthy. And we're going to do a lot of different things on the show today. We're going to have some news discussions, we're going to have some business discussions, and much more. But there is certainly one way that we like to get things going on this program, and that's by me asking you, what's your groove?
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
Can you dig it?
Kinda grabs you by the boo-boo, don't it?
Pipe in a grape, long in a blend.
This is great. This is the bee's knees.
Can you dig it?
So when I ask you what's your groove, for those of you that are new to the show, if you're listening to this program and you're grooving with anything cannabis-wise, hit me up and let me know. Email me, cannabis101podcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on any of our social media feeds at the Cannabis 101 on Twitter and the Cannabis 101 podcast on Facebook and Instagram. So this is what I'm grooving with. Still not back to a lot of inhalation, as pneumonia takes a while. But I'm going with some WYLIE drops. And these are simple. Comes in a jar like so. Just put your drops in. I'll tell you the formula in a second. And then however many drops you want to throw in there is what you will get. And like I said, I will tell you what the drops mean in a second, because they give you that handy information right here on the bottle. So you just peel back the label a little bit, and it says 1.0 milligrams total THC per activation. So 2 drops equals 1 milligram of THC. So that's how you can figure out your dosage. Really, really good. I wouldn't say this, or I would say this is flavorless. I put it in some peppermint tea, so we'll see what it tastes like. I have found it does have a taste. There's definitely a taste. When I put it in my coffee, it's the taste is evaporated. We'll see what the tea is. So let me get my groove on. Yeah, I can't. The peppermint tea certainly masks that sort of the taste that comes with it. But yeah, that's what I'm grooving with. Some very WYLIE drops. Let me know what you are grooving with, if indeed you are. All right, here's what's coming down the hash pipe on this episode. David WYLIE from the OZ. He's going to drop in for This Week in Cannabis News. Some really anti-cannabis and pro-stigma going on in the city of Vernon in Canada. So we're going to tackle that story, along with things that are happening in the U.S. that Canadian companies have their eyes on, and some of the views from the U.S. about Canada's legalization, and some cool drinks coming to the state of Colorado that would probably be something that's actually owned by a Canadian company, and kind of a good start to maybe brand some cannabis drinks and things like that. So that's coming up in This Week in Cannabis News. MALKA LABELL from the Green Generation Co. will join us for the business of cannabis as usual. We'll be chatting about brands, canopy growth and small producers, and ripe fruit in what it means to be green. So all of that coming up. Our cannabis question is about the retail industry. I want to give you some weed words of the day, and we'll tell you about the Weed Weekly, where you can get in on our giveaway every Friday. But let's get things going right now, where you can chime in to win with the cannabis question.
It's prize time. Chime in on the cannabis question.
Okay.
And you could win a Cannabis 101 podcast prize pack.
Pipe and a crepe, bong and a blint.
Hit us up on any of our social media feeds or email us at cannabis101podcast@gmail.com.
Okay, here we go.
So the cannabis question, what is your go-to retail store and why is it that? And I can't wait to hear some of the responses from, some of the people. I've really enjoyed hearing people reaching out to me from Ontario and Quebec and the United States, and obviously here in Alberta and Western Canada. But I really want to know some of the stores that maybe I haven't heard of, so I can kind of put them on my list when I do a little cross-Canada cannabis trip. So for me, I try to spread it around when I get to the city of Edmonton. I live just outside of the city, but when I'm in St. Albert, it's Plant Life most of the time, or Uncle Sam's because of geography. I go to that because it's right down the street, but if I'm running out to get something in St. Albert, most of the time I'm going to Plant Life. Sometimes I'll go to Fire and Flower. There's a couple of Fire and Flower stores now, 2 Plant Lifes. A few more. I want to get to some of the more independent ones that are out there as well that have opened up. But that's for me. I find in St. Albert, I like the selection that Plant Life. I've gotten to know the bud tenders and the managers and the employees really, really well. My go-to guy is Gage, who bounces back and forth between Jensen Lakes and Aaron Ridge. He's really got some great information all the time. He kind of knows. When I was sick, I was kind of relying on edibles. I wasn't inhaling. My wife basically went, "Hey, you probably know Dean a lot better." And he did. He helped her out with some of the things that he knows I like. So that's kind of, I've gotten to know those people. And like your friendly neighborhood, wine store, if you're into that, or bread store, or whatever it is, you find something you're comfortable with, and you'll return, and that's kind of why. But I also like, when I get to the city, I like to go to Numo. I like to visit some different Nova cannabis stores. So there's lots of different ones that you can check out. Green Rock Cannabis as well is opening in Edmonton and St. Albert. I like to go see Daniel over there, the Burley chef. He's helped me out with a few different things. So there's lots of different places I like to spread things around to, and I'd imagine you too as well. But if you do have a favorite, please let me know. Email me, cannabis101podcast@gmail.com, or you can reply on social media, any of our feeds, the Cannabis 101 on Twitter, the Cannabis 101 podcast on Facebook or Instagram, and you could be walking away with a Cannabis 101 podcast prize pack. David WYLIE coming up, MALKA LABELL as well, 2 of our great partners. Andre from Regal Cigars has been so supportive, and a lot of those stores that I just mentioned, they've also been so supportive, rather. And the cannabis industry, you have to be partners with everybody. You do have to help out and get helped out by a lot of people. Pay it forward, basically. So I always like to give a shout out to the people that have helped us out, and that includes Stone Smiths. Check out the Slash at stonesmiths.ca. It has a built-in loader. It is ridiculously awesome for concentrates. You dip the loader in, dump it in, and away you go. If you're new to dabbing and the torch is kind of intimidating, this is definitely for you. Also, if you live in cold temperatures like we do, it's about minus 30 with the wind chill here. This battery is built for Edmonton cold winters. This is an Edmonton company. They know exactly what they're talking about. When I feel better, I can't wait to get out and really test that battery. I'll wait till it gets down to the -50, -60, and that's when we start actually putting pants on instead of wearing shorts here in St. Albert. We're pretty tough. So, by the way, you could pick this up in Edmonton at Shell Shock, Smokers Junction in Calgary, and Cowboys Smoke Shop in Calgary or Vancouver. And definitely if you're a retail store, this is one of the hot items that you should have in your store, and something new coming in the spring, just in time for 420 from Stonesmiths. Check them out, stonesmith.ca. Thank you to all of our partners, including you, the listener and the viewer.
What's happening? We'll tell you right now on This Week in Cannabis News.
My good friend David WYLIE from the OZ is joining me on This Week in Cannabis News. You can find them online at OkanaganZ.com and on Twitter at OkanaganZ. David, great to chat with you again. How are things in the Valley today?
Doing pretty good. Lots of snow falling. So, I'm about ready to be done with the snow and done with winter. Mm-hmm. But, we'll take it. Maybe get a little bit of sledding in later.
Yeah, exactly. And, skiing is probably one of those things that people can, actually get out and do right now with some of the restrictions. It's kind of an,
True.
I guess, solo sport sort of thing. You can do it on your own. So at least there's good reasons for snow sometimes. I'm like you. I'm kind of like, once you get past January, man, I am ready for spring. And then spring always seems to take so long. But we'll have to get there by being patient. And one of the things that we've been talking about a lot, David, is how possible legalization will impact what's already legalized in Canada. How far ahead will the U.S. be right out of the gate, and what impact that will have on Canadian companies. There's a lot of Canadian companies kind of sitting on pins and needles right now waiting for this to happen, aren't they?
Yeah, there's lots of deals in the works for when the U.S., gets its act together and figures out how they're going to be doing legalization, or at least some kind of framework that fits across the nation. And a lot of people are watching, including BMO. And one BMO analyst says that this is a possible $60 billion market that many people are salivating over, but she's urging some caution. And we've talked about what the more cannabis-friendly Biden administration is going to do, the optimism behind the MORE Act possibly, coming into effect. But Tammy Chen says that cannabis just really isn't at the top of the Democratic to-do list. It's COVID and other kinds of issues. And even if the MORE Act were passed overnight, she says it won't impose full legalization across the U.S., and that it would take time for federal bodies there like the DEA and the FDA to establish their own positions and their own standards. And she says that investors just should not assume that within a few months that we're going to have big changes in the U.S. Federal cannabis law. Now, even if those big changes were to happen, that doesn't necessarily mean great things for Canadian companies. It's going to bring new opportunities for Canadian cannabis companies, sure, to formally enter the U.S. market, but it could also take away the advantage that these Canadian cannabis stocks have had over the much larger U.S. market, because the U.S. has frankly had its hands tied behind its back without a framework that they can use to grow federally. So the MORE Act could actually be negative for Canadian LP stock valuations and much more positive for U.S. cannabis companies. So there's definitely a little bit of trepidation happening right now, and mixed in with that optimism.
Right. The one thing that I did like that she pointed out is that, getting into the U.S. market could be a good route for Canadian companies that have a lot of supply right now. That could be an issue or a situation where Canadians can maybe taking advantage. But, whatever the U.S. framework is going to be, I am willing to bet it's going to be more business friendly than the Canadian one is. And that already, David, is going to put the US at the very least even with where Canada is after 2 years, in my opinion, if not ahead. And it's going to force Canada, Health Canada, and the Cannabis Act review to take action and be able to, at the very least, stay even with some of these countries that are coming out with easier guidelines in their legalization.
You bet. We've really seen the differences. I mean, the Martha Stewart gummies are definitely something that I look to regularly. They're packaged differently. Martha Stewart can actually speak to people on behalf of that company and endorse it, which is something that can happen here in Canada. And, as you pointed out, there's a little bit of good news in there for Canadian LPs who may have more flower than they know what to do with. But that would only be for the medical market and not for anything else, just because of the way that our trade agreements go. So, there's a lot of mystery about what this is going to mean. And some of that optimism, according to BMO, which is pretty tied in, may be misplaced.
I wonder, there's so many restrictions. Is Seth Rogen even allowed to tweet out a picture of him drinking a houseplant drink? Or would that be considered, he doesn't have to say anything about it, or he could just say this is tasty, but that might be considered over the line in the Cannabis Act, just taking a picture because he's involved in it. So certainly a lot of evolution has to happen on that front. Evolution is what has happened for, what's that, sorry?
It's true. Yeah, I agree. And that's a lot of this stuff still needs to be ironed out, frankly, here in Canada. And a lot of these laws are untested.
Yeah, exactly. And it'd be interesting to see somebody challenge some, and it's going to happen at some point if the Cannabis Act isn't changed, etc. All right, I was mentioning before about the evolution of brewing company in the United States. This is a really good story with some cool connections. And I love the connection to Colorado in that, one of the company's, I believe, CEO spends a lot of time there, but also the connection to legalization. I mean, Colorado was like the marijuana poster child for a little while in North America because they were the first ones to be legal. And I've had friends that have gone there and said it's like the opposite, totally opposite here. It's just so much different. So I love the connections, but tell us a little bit about what's going on with Sweetwater Brewing Company.
This is a perfect transition from the last story too, because these are things that you could do in the US that you just can't do in Canada. But this actually is, I'd say, a hint of things to come. Sweetwater Brewing is owned by a Canadian cannabis company, Aphria. And this Sweetwater Brewing is expanding into Colorado. They're going to be offering their different cannabis kind of branded beers. So 420 Extra Pale Ale, a Hazy IPA, G13 IPA, and High Light Low Cal Easy IPA in bars, restaurants, and retailers starting on February 1st. Meanwhile, Sweetwater has actually recently filed trademark applications in the US for Sweetwater Broken Coast Head Stash Lager and Sweetwater Broken Coast Pie in the Sky Lager, plus 8 different variations of both of those for different categories like beer, hard seltzer, soft drinks, energy drinks. So this is also an expansion of a really well-known Canadian cannabis brand into the US in kind of a backdoor way, something that we wouldn't see here in Canada, particularly because our current cannabis regulations forbid any marketing crossover between weed and alcohol. So that's a barrier here. You could never see a Broken Coast lager here because they're not allowed. So this expansion into Colorado is actually kind of an interesting homecoming for their CEO and their founder. He did he graduated from post-secondary school there and started working with beer in Colorado. So this is fun for him. It's a chance to revisit that state again. And, since he started playing around with beer in Colorado and founded the Sweetwater Company, it's really gone gangbusters. It's one of the nation's top 15 craft breweries by sales volume, and that's according to the Brewers Association. They have beers in 27 states. So it's pretty fascinating to see the differences, between the Canadian and U.S. industry there, and how a Canadian brand is now looking to make headway in the States.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, and I think there was some confusion about, is this an alcoholic drink? Is this a cannabis drink? It says 5.3% alcohol. I did find an article that says, and they actually say, disclaimer, the ingredients only lend to flavor and aroma. Since there's no THC, there's no getting high off the 420 strain series. And hopefully that's the case. I don't think we should ever be mixing alcohol and cannabis in a drink. I think it should be one or the other. And it'll be interesting to see the Canadian connection with this, and when everything, like there's a lot of I guess like the whack-a-moles ready to pop up around if things go right, and it'll be interesting to see, because we're seeing cannabis infused, THC infused drinks here, and I know you're a fan, and I think they're getting better.
Oh, yeah.
I don't ever think we should mix alcohol and THC together, and I'm glad that these appear not to be the case.
And while they're not mixing alcohol and cannabis together, what they are doing is they're increasing brand presence.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
people who are familiar with these kinds of beers, someone drinking a Broken Coast beer, and then, at some point maybe making a crossover into the cannabis store, would notice that there's a Broken Coast cannabis there. So yeah, I agree with you. Mixing cannabis and alcohol definitely increases the potency of both of those things. So there's got to be a lot of caution when you're doing that.
But you're definitely right, man. That is, when they get to THC infused drinks, they're already going to have that brand placement and in people's minds. So a really, really smart idea. All right, this next story that we're going to chat about is, I found it quite interesting. It's a long read, but it's a good read, and it's from the New York Times, looking at legalizing cannabis. And the headline is, 2 years after legalizing cannabis, has Canada kept its promises? So I'll let you kind of dive into this, and then maybe I'll come in with some of the thoughts that I kind of have on this one. But what were your thoughts on this article?
It really shows that all eyes are on Canada. The New York Times is such a big deal. And I was taken aback by the comparison that the writer made between two cases, two arrests involving cannabis. They talked off the top about Robert, who was arrested in 1988 as a teenager. And then a little later on, they talked about Michel Trudeau, of course, one of Pierre Trudeau's sons. And in Robert's case, the arrest marked the start of a long, unhappy history in the legal system. It really ruined his life. Like many who go in jail, Robert got trapped in crime and spent a total of 14 years locked up, divided between drug offense convictions and thefts in order to support the drug habit. And a lot of those things came about because of the time in jail, or people use it as coping mechanisms, or you develop, certain alliances. Meanwhile, in Michel Trudeau's case, he was caught with joints, and his dad was able to make those charges go away thanks to their resources and connections. And that story is not uncommon in Canada, where, the cannabis laws were very much focused on mainly arresting people who were Black, Indigenous, of color. And, people who were white like myself. I have my own personal stories of getting busted many, many years back and getting off with a warning, while friends of mine who were colored did not get those same chances. Now, the New York Times article definitely explores that, and it talks about the fact that the new laws have all but eliminated possession charges. That is a huge plus, and I'm so glad to see that. Now, one of the challenges, however, is that the amnesty program that the federal government put into place to erase criminal records for possession has so many barriers to access that as of mid-November of last year, only 341 people had actually succeeded in erasing their criminal records. Now, there are no fees, right? But applicants have to frequently spend money and time traveling to the place where they were arrested to retrieve their records, and they need to be fingerprinted. So things need to change with that. You know, a lot of people would like to see those records just automatically erased rather than having to go through some lengthy process in order to do it. Another thing that was found to be not necessarily a failure, but certainly we're behind on, is that a lot of indigenous cannabis sellers are still in legal limbo. And nobody seems to know what to do when it comes to indigenous-owned cannabis stores. They're still operating. Nobody wants to enforce on them because we don't know how the law might apply to indigenous land. Yet there's a lot of frustration in the legal industry that those kinds of stores are able to operate in a gray area that legalization was supposed to erase, and that they're facing competition that they weren't necessarily prepared to when they made major investments into, jumping through the red tape and the costs associated. So it's a very fascinating read on the outside world perspective of successes and failures so far 2 years into legalization here in Canada.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting read. The one thing I do agree with is, I don't know why there has to be so many hoops for people to jump through to get these records. Why can't we just go through it? Pot conviction, done. Pot conviction, done. Like, it's, what are we weighing which cases deserve expungement over others? Well, that's not the story we were told. So I do agree on that front, and I do agree that Indigenous people have been left in that gray area, and have, we've talked about that story. They couldn't even get a meeting with the premier, and things like that in BC. So I agree on one hand. The couple of things I maybe take issue with in this article, and maybe on a broader sense, is the one line, and I think we have it on our screen here, is that it says pot sales outside the legal system still thrive. I would take exception to that. I'm not naive or simple enough to think that there is no black market anymore, but I think, and we've seen studies that have shown that the legal market has taken a big chunk out of the illicit market. Now, if you're looking at the same studies that Peter MacKay looks at, then you would think otherwise, because those are just blatantly made up in his mind. But there are statistics that show the illegal market has had a bite taken out of it. And the other thing that I would just point out about this is it's barely 2 years in. Like, it is ridiculous to think that you would have all the problems sorted out and solved in 2 years and you would wipe out the illegal market. If anybody thought that within 2 years there would be no more black market and all the problems would be great, I've got some fresh Alberta snow to sell you as miracle water that is going to change your life, because you are naive if you thought that. So we have to give this just a little bit of time to keep working. Overall, I think Canada has done a good job. We haven't had to take a whole lot of stuff back like they did in Colorado. So I think, listen, there are issues. Yes, I'm acknowledging that. And there are things that should have happened already, like expungement of records. But to think that, within 2 years, the illegal market still wouldn't be out there is just ridiculous. So a lot of good points in this article, but let's remember this has barely been 2 years. And I don't know who expected legalization to happen, snap your fingers and everything was perfect, but that's in a fantasy world.
Well, retail sales at legal stores continue to climb, and Statistics Canada has found that legal sales have outpaced black market sales. So yeah, absolutely. And expungement of records, fully on board. That needs to happen. We need to make sure that people aren't held back anymore by petty possession charges.
All right, this next story is just such a head scratcher, and maybe you can give a little background on the city of Vernon, and it's some people's, I don't want to say the entire city because I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, but there are some in that city that really seem to have something against cannabis business. Can you give us some background and lead us into this story about some opposing more cannabis stores?
Sure. I've spent a lot of time in Vernon. I used to be a managing editor of a newspaper up there. And one thing that I can tell you is that it's a very conservative place. perhaps the most conservative place in all of the Okanagan, which is known in its own right to be a bit of a Bible Belt. And yet, on the other side of the spectrum, they've actually granted licenses for 17 cannabis stores so far in Vernon, and that's creating some tension. I mean, it is the highest concentration of legal cannabis stores in all of BC. They also have quite a large number of unlicensed stores too. So there's kind of a strange butting of heads, I guess, that seems to be happening there right now. And once again, legal retail cannabis stores are facing very vocal opposition with critics that are really flinging fear. We've got 2 more cannabis stores that are applying to open, and Roxanne Petrick is one of those leading the way. She's the executive director of Okanagan Valley College of Massage Therapy. She wrote a letter to council that they're going to be discussing today, actually, against a nearby cannabis store. And she says that multiple stores downtown gives the sense of a drug alley, that it attracts loitering of persons in the drug culture as opposed to families and tourism. She says that she's worried about the safety of her students who have to walk past or near the proposed store. She says that although a cannabis retailer on its own doesn't necessarily increase the risk of theft or assault, but promoting a general sense that if you want drugs, that downtown is the place to be, is increasing unwanted trafficking and decreasing student safety. And, she's not alone. Dave Reel from Vernview Dev argues that the downtown core has a problem with homeless people who congregate and feed off of others by begging or panhandling. You could tell that, these are not necessarily, the most kind-hearted people, just simply by the way that they're referring to, those that are down on their luck. This guy here, Dave, says that, to be fair, he's not going to classify most of these people in a category that would be frequenting a legal cannabis shop, but says that there still might be some common links or something that could be associated with the city's drug problem. This isn't the first time that people have said this kind of thing. About a year ago, there was a commercial realtor with Remax. And he basically wrote that no professional business wants to have a legal cannabis store as a neighbor. And I can tell you with the businesses that I've spoke to and gone into that is absolutely not the case. A lot of different businesses would love to have a well-operated legal cannabis store as a neighbor. And that's something that we're seeing. A lot of the stores in Vernon, the Okanagan, and Canada-wide are clean, bright, well-operated, and are attracting customers from all across different demographics.
Yeah, this is just silly. First of all, the people that are complaining about, as they called it, the beggars and the homeless, I'm guessing those people have never missed a meal in their life, because how they talk about them shows that they have never faced that kind of adversity or know a lot of people that have, because there is a total lack of compassion. Secondly, you're telling me you take all those cannabis stores out of Vernon and the homeless problem, or as they call it, the vagrant problem, is going to go away? Give your head a shake. It's just simply ridiculous. Now, I have to explain something to Roxanne in her logic so she will understand it, because what Roxanne, you said the executive director of Okanagan Valley College of Massage Therapy, what Roxanne is exhibiting is pure ignorance, and she is pushing the stigma to call it drug alley. Well, first of all, it's a plant. And by Roxanne's logic, I should assume that the Okanagan Valley College is just putting out people that are going to go work in rub and tugs and the sexual industry. Seriously, that's the ignorance of Roxanne's statement, talking about a drug alley because there are legal cannabis stores. She is showing so much ignorance. I'm trying to point out that maybe they're just putting out students that are going to work in rub and tugs. Like, that's how ridiculous Roxanne's statement is. I know my statement about people is ridiculous. One of my best friends is the chair of massage therapy at MacEwan College. I know that's a professional profession. It's an industry that is regulated, just like the cannabis industry. So Roxanne, please do some research, because you're looking like an ignorant fool in this way by talking like that. Do some research. Look at in Manitoba. They are recommending cannabis to be used in the massage industry. So Roxanne, do some homework, because you're embarrassing yourself with that kind of statement. Now, I'm sorry, David, for going off on a rant, but that is just simply pushing the stigma that we're trying to get rid of and pure ignorance. The other thing I will say is there's the one quote here that says, competition is healthy at this scale. Viability of the existing retail outlets is already stretched. Now, I think the population is about 40,000 or something in Vernon, from what I read, maybe a little bit more. That does seem a lot of stores, 17, but I don't think that store owner would like all the stores to be thrown in a hat and then his drawn out and he has to go. So we have to remember free market, and yeah, some places are saturated, and that's going to take care of itself, in my opinion. It's going to be the survival of the fittest. There might be 17 stores today and less than that because they can't make it. I don't like the idea of ignorance, or, you know, maybe a little bit of greed and not wanting a lot of competition. I don't know what your thoughts are on my rant, but I'll let you have the last word on this.
I think that there's a lot of arguments that are based in fact that you could make if you so wanted to, including that there are a large number of stores. I think that throwing fear and shade and stigma around is pretty damn irresponsible. And I'm really interested to hear what Vernon City Council has to say about this, and whether or not they're going to continue to promote that stigma, or whether they're going to stop it right where it stands.
Yeah, and they should stop it, because it's bloody ridiculous. And like I said, people that throw that stuff around there have not done a shred of research on any of this, or else they wouldn't say things that are so irresponsible and damaging to a legal industry. So anyway, you know how I feel. That's enough of my rant for this week. So we'll wrap things up at there. But make sure you check things out at OkanaganZ.com and on Twitter at OkanaganZ. Get all your cannabis news daily from the OZ. Thanks as always, David. We'll chat next week.
Good to see you.
Smoke some grass. It's time to bust out this podcast.
Beautiful stuff from the artist My Dead Dog. That is the Weed Song. You'll hear Marijuana coming up to wrap up the show a little bit later on. And we might have a few more things coming out from the artist My Dead Dog. Some more cannabis, marijuana, pot-themed music. I love it. What I don't love, unfortunately, is that the Cannabis and Hemp Expo has been unfortunately postponed again. Whenever this does happen, we'll be there. We'll be on location, and we'll be broadcasting episodes. And we'd love for you to come down and say hi if you're in the area. We'll be at the Edmonton one. You can get more information at CannabisHempExpo.com, and we will have some tickets to give away whenever this event gets off the ground and we are able to safely and responsibly hold it.
This is the Cannabis 101 podcast, part of the Cannabis Life Experience, turning the wheel of cannabis one toke at a time. This is the Business of Cannabis, a joint venture between the Green Generation Co. and the Cannabis 101 podcast, bringing you the latest bud, biz, buzz.
Now, Another edition of The Business of Cannabis with MALKA LABELL of the Green Generation Co. Check out online at greengencompany.com. And Malka, it is great to see you. It seems like forever since we were last chatted, so it's great to see you and chat with you again.
I know, Dean. I was worried about you. I'm glad to see you're back to your mostly self and almost better, and I'm glad to hear your voice again, that's for sure. I was definitely some scary times there, so glad to see you're better.
Yes, it was, it's, hospitals are not the most fun place at the best of time, especially during a pandemic where they have to ensure that those frontline workers are protected. So my advice for anybody is do not go to the emergency room unless it is a actual emergency, because there are so many things and so many protocols that they have to work with. Any extra small things that can be handled away from the emergency room, please do that. So a lot more respect, certainly, and getting to see what they have to deal with. But I am, as you mentioned, feeling better and looking forward to talking to you about the latest Bud Biz Buzz. And let's start with our lead topic today. And you're going to tell us why brands shouldn't build tribes.
Yeah, and it's funny because you were just talking about Shabazz here a second ago. So our homie Shabazz from Dutchy, good friend through the industry of mine. I love it. He's on LinkedIn all the time, and he's always calling out to the other influencers and experts in the space, wanting to know our thoughts. So he had done a podcast with a group in the US about whatever he's working on. And he was talking about, the awareness, the fact that there wasn't a lot of awareness of Canadian brands in the cannabis space in the US or anywhere. And he was saying things like, brands need to build tribes. And this was a piece of contention for me. And he had called me out in the post to comment on his topic. So I listened to the podcast. It was a great interview, actually, really cool. But what he was talking about was not something that I agree with. And here is why. So I'm going to talk about what is a brand for a second. And you see on your screen there a beautiful colored bubble of, and those are the actual colors of those brands. And the size of them are relative to their market cap, I believe is what the relative sizing is. So a brand is an inanimate thing, okay? It is manufactured by a corporation for the purpose of making a profit. That is, by definition, what a brand is and does. Building a tribe, however, is a human behavior. It is an innately human behavior that no other apes do it, and other groups that live in community settings get together as community. But the tribe aspect is innately human. But groups of people coming together to make a tribe often have emblems of their tribe, like a flag or a coat of arms that might be on a battle shield. So that's an example of a brand as it relates to humans coming together to form a tribe. A national flag, like the flag of a country or a flag of a state or a province. Those are examples of brands for tribes. A brand is also a cattle brand by definition. So that's searing the flesh of an animal, which symbolizes its ownership over a valuable commodity. So that's how, cattle kind of all looks the same. And, people that own cattle would cattle brand them so that they knew that they were their herd and that they were owned by that cattle rancher. So somewhere along the way, brands are now trending to needing tribes around them. And this is like a cool thing. And I happen to think it's actually a really, really stupid thing. And it's because it's like really bad to a biblical sense. And what I mean by that is alongside of being a tribe, there's the concept of tribalism. Now, if you're familiar with, tribalism and tribal warfare, is kind of a thing of not people fighting against each other. There's a reason why tribes would go to war, and it's very divisive. It's usually over protecting the common interest, but against another group. So protecting resources like land, like rights for grazing or rights for cattle examples. But the pushback here is that a brand, the pushback is a consumer wanting more data and on the package, and terpene information and harvest dates. I'm bringing this back to the cannabis industry for the point here. As a fact check, this is from John Fowler, by the way, on your last show. He is a genius, and I really need to connect with him because he's been respecting the plant as long as the current industry can really attach to, but his concepts were really predate him, and I love that he was bringing that forward. What he was saying is that the brand is the strain. Like, there is no other brand. And the fact that companies are coming together to say, you have to build a tribe around this so we can have recognition as a brand, and the brand they're talking to is a company for corporate profit, is the part that hurts me here. And why is the brand is there? The brand is there to serve the needs of the customer. The brand is emblematic of the repeatability for consistency, and trust is really what it is. A brand in the business sense is trying to build trust with the consumer. And this comes to these little colored bubbles here, because as I have mentioned over and over and over again in a lot of my content, is that the consumer good, packaged good world has taken this concept of brands and building a love of a brand and putting it on a package with some color and making that brand stand for something is essentially a false idol. And why is that? Well, it took Coca-Cola. Let's use Coca-Cola as an example. It took Coca-Cola 250 years from when it was first invented as a brown fuzzy liquid and telling people that that was a good thing that they should drink and enjoy, and that we now know that they were really lying to us the whole time at the expense of the consumer's health, causing obesity epidemic. I'm going to say that Coca-Cola is responsible. And they've had to hide that fact for a long time by coming up with Coke without calories and putting fake sugar in it. And that hasn't been good either, and Coke Zero. So they've had to spend a lot of money to prove or try and prove that their product is consistent, is repeatable, and that it's good for you, when really it was addictive and very harmful. And that's essentially the innate purpose of that's against the concept of tribes. Tribes come around people that are trying to build something of common value, and because they're trusted individuals. You build tribes with people that you know, like, and trust, kind of like how you may have built a tribe, or the way that you trust your former dealer on the corner or whoever you got your weed from prior to legalization. That trust part is the part that the cannabis industry has not created in Canada yet. They have not delivered a consistent product that people are always going back for. I'm not saying categorically, I'm just saying as a concept. Like, we've talked about some brands that we really like and that we recognize, and John Fowler pointed out that people are coming in asking for his brand that he created, and that was a point of pride for him. They called out the 7 Acres brand as because they liked it, they trusted it was a quality that they enjoyed. But you can't manufacture that. That is it's like a service thing. It's a trust thing. And if people consistently get let down by something that they're supposed to trust, it's really fake. It's a false idol. And that is not what we want to create in the cannabis industry. We want to trust the product. We don't want to have fact checking on the label. We want to have the knowledge that the strains that we're being delivered, that we're using, or the products that we're using are good for us. And the way that the industry has been designed, it's kind of a good thing in the sense that you really have to force people to trust what's good by hearing it from other people and by recommending it to other people that have tried it and said, yeah, that's a good product. That's a good strain. I like that one. I like how I enjoy it and it's consistent. But the way that marketing works, that's a falsehood. They're trying to buy your trust, and they can't do that in the cannabis industry. And that's in Canada anyways, but it's still out there with other things. So that's what I mean, is that the concept of, and I use the golden calf example from the biblical times. And I found this really funny cartoon where, Trump is an example of a false god, like literally, not figuratively, like fully literally, building towers with his name on it. He created a brand that was entirely fake, and it crumbled, obviously, and that was not a good thing. But I'm just saying is that don't be beholden to the false idols. Don't be beholden to the false brands, to the false tribes that people are trying to get you to rally around. trust your gut, trust your friends, trust the people that you know, like, and trust already to ask for what you want as a good product and what should be a good product, because they know you better than the brand knows you. And I'm just going to say that trust in the cannabis industry has not been yet solidified. And building a tribe around a brand is not a good thing. But it's better to ask a friend or someone that you know and someone that you like. And that's how trust is built consistently through things that you enjoy.
Well, and we also have to remember that we're dealing with something that just 2 and a bit years ago was illegal. So it's going to take longer. We're not talking about shoes here. We're not talking about, bread or something like that. This is a product that was illegal. That trust with the consumer that maybe was not a cannabis user it's going to take a longer time to build up that trust. And I personally think more information. I know John Fowler, when he was with me, talked about, people wanting terpenes. He called it bullshit and it's just extra work, but it's also more information. I feel with this product, especially, we need to give transparent information for the consumer about what is in this product and educate them and things like that. So I think that especially with this product, it's a little bit different than something that has not been illegal for however many years.
Exactly. It's like he talked about net promoter scores, and I think that's a good example. It's a real business term, but the point is that most businesses start at 0 for their brand trust. Cannabis, we're at like -1,000.
Right,
like we have 100 years of stigma to come up to a 0, and then we have to go positive. So there's a lot of building that has to be done. It's not going to happen overnight. Some companies are just starting to get there. What the cool thing is that the trust in this situation in cannabis is going to come from the retailer. And the retail stores are starting to show a profit and starting to show the positive numbers. I think Spirit Leaf's numbers came out this week showing that they're already at a positive, EBITDA. So I think the good thing here is that there is trust to be had. It just takes longer to get there, and it's harder to build because we're coming from a place of literally having been misinformed for a very long time. And just to your point about the terpenes, I'm not suggesting that we don't want to know about terpenes. I'm just saying that there are other ways to get that information other than putting them on the label that are just as empowering and helpful for the consumer that doesn't add more cost to the current process. That's all. There are definitely, you want to know what the terpene profiles are of your plant, or at least the top few, but them needing to be on every label and being able to be actually tested for that batch is a different conversation, which we'll leave for another day.
Yeah, as long as that information is somewhere when the consumer walks into a store, or is readily available from a bud tender as well. So however we can get that information out to the consumer, whether that's in-store stuff or things like that, I'm all for it. And it also provides transparency to a product that has been anything but, because unfortunately it was illegal for so long. So all right, let's get on to change makers now, and tell me why we are talking about canopy growth.
So I had a lot of personal inner dialogue around this. But what I really liked about Canopy, and why I guess I pointed in the changemaker of the week, was because the new CEO has an actual strategy. So I'm a business strategist. That's my title for my own company and in general. And I look at this under a microscope across all industries, and we have not seen this clearly articulated yet in cannabis. So this is sort of why I said it's a changemaker, is they've got a bit of history under their belt. They have learned their own hard, painful lessons. And this year they're talking about, with their new CEO, that they're making room for smaller producers to grow, the year of the craft cannabis. So we've been talking about the craft cannabis. I've been announcing it's the year of craft cannabis. I'm saying it out loud more and more and more, because I think it's not only true, but I'm going to make it to be true. And explaining they're talking about the right sizing of their plants and closing down facilities, and literally some of them are burning to the ground. Oops, insurance companies are new owners of cannabis plants. So I didn't say that. I was just literally kind of listening to conversations. I'm like, interesting. But what they are talking about is Canopy is looking to hire more specialized staff in certain areas. They're looking to hire more master growers, more scientists, people that are food scientists, people that really understand the botany. And the cool thing about cannabis is that there's so much we don't know about it yet. And one of the coolest things I learned recently was that there's thousands of active compounds or chemicals inside a cannabis plant, or active molecules. Other plants only have hundreds. 10-fold more stuff inside a cannabis plant than anything else that grows on this planet. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, and there's a lot to unlock there. But basically, Cannabis talking about buying more wholesale flower from good, smaller growers, so from craft producers, and they're looking to increase the business on the wholesale market, like from Canadian Cannabis Exchange, who we've talked about before too. Those are great guys over there and gals. So they're looking for a focus on higher profit products, so edibles, beverages, and concentrates, so the things that don't look like a plant, and making good plants turn into those things. And they figured out what they did well, and they're honing in on it. That strategy. They figured out what they were good at, and they're doing more of that. And that's exactly the essence of strategy that I like here. I personally sold off my Canopy stock in 2018 at its peak, but this new CEO strategy makes sense, and I would buy it again. And I give my example with I have a very specific set of principles in investing. Their stock chart right now on the long-term index, like the 3-year span, looks like the shape of what I would buy. And if you want more information on how I choose stocks, that's a whole separate conversation. But basically, Canopy has a little bit of a glimmer of hope for me, and talking about these craft growers is one of them.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, realizing that they're going to get better cannabis with the Canopy Growth brand, as we talked about before, and better cannabis as well. Before we get to what it means to be green, if you would like to find out how MALKA can help you out, check out the website greengencompany.com, and lots of things to sign off. Love ending the stigma on cannabis, so always excited to be able to talk about that. So check it out, greengencompany.com. All right. Tell me why we are talking about ripe bananas in What It Means to Be Green.
Actually, so the funniest thing is I came up with this concept as a segment before I heard John Fowler's piece, but he actually explained it better than I could. So I'm going to use it again. Like, I think we're on the same, smoking the same thing, but actually we are. He did mention something that I do smoke. But basically, the green banana ripeness chart I put up as a picture. What it was talking about is a couple things, but basically, like green bananas, startups or cannabis businesses with lots of potential bet on regulatory changes. So what that means is, I'm in the startup ecosystem right now as I'm launching the Green Book and talking more about that with accelerators and investors, and the focus on the lessons from seeing so many different pitch decks. So as for my business, the Green Generation Company, I'm helping other cannabis businesses grow by finding investors and things like that. So I'm really tapped into the whole startup world that's not specific to cannabis. But one thing that we see a lot of, kind of like an unripened fruit that's, it's unripe because it's green. That is the hands down identifying piece of fruit when it's not fully ripe, is that it's green. And kind of like that, a fatal flaw, also called default dead, is the term that the Y Combinator, this is Paul Graham, he's the creator of the Y Combinator in Silicon Valley, the least capitalist of capitalism. I think I like that phrase. He's talking about companies that base their entire business model on something that has to change in the government in order for it to be successful. So that's a default dead position. It's like you're literally betting the farm, in this case cannabis, an entire farm, on the laws changing. And this is what I'm seeing a lot of. But the bigger problem is that they haven't done their research for product market fit. And this is what I mean when I say that, people don't really get it, that even if they have a great idea, there may not be anyone else that thinks that way. And that's the reason why they should keep doing research. And I tell this to my entrepreneurs all the time that I work with. If there's no one that wants to buy your product and you cannot sell it to them, it's not a product. It's not a business. Your right. Default debt. You're starting with zero and there's nowhere to go from there. So you need to keep iterating, keep changing, keep finding the talk track, the value proposition. It is a work in progress until someone says, yes, I get it, and I will buy that as a customer, not as an investor. And if it has to do with the laws changing in order for it to work, that's a green banana, essentially. It's too early. It's too early in this stage. And it's not necessarily that it can't work. It's just that it hasn't yet been able to prove it to the market for people to buy it or the consumer to buy it. And that's what happens in this case is we're in an industry where the laws are prohibitive for a lot of functions in Canada. So I've seen people go to the US and try their idea and it works. But because of the way that we have things here, we just can't bet on the laws changing. I mean, they could change, but they could change against your idea. So that's what I'm saying. Don't bet your business idea on a green banana or default dead. And that's what happens. If you don't have a good idea, then it's over, game over. So I'm here to help you with things like that. That's what the green generation is all about. So,
it's like betting on the weather, right? Like it could change so quickly. You don't know any of assurance, right? And in Alberta, and they say this probably everywhere. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes or whatever it might be. But you're betting on something that, it might happen. Yeah, there's a good chance it's snowing today, but there's also a chance it's not going to. That's why I totally agree with you on that. So good stuff today. And a reminder, if you want to find out how MALKA can help you, check out greengencompany.com. Thanks as always, MALKA. We'll chat next week.
Thanks, Dean. Have a great week.
Bud, dope, flower, ganja, Mary Jane.
We all have our own language when it comes to cannabis.
Herb, John Lennon, plant, Thai stick, salad.
So let's explore another weed word of the day.
Samuel L. Jackson, The Hobbit's Leaf, Lady Gaga, 420.
All right, for those of you new to the show, this is how Weed Word of the Day works. I give you one slang word, one standard industry term. The slang word is daga. It's, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's a South African slang word for cannabis, dates back to the 1660s, and it comes from the word daka, and I apologize on this, in the cuckoo language. I'm only basing that pronunciation off Oilers defenseman in the NHL, Slater Cuckoo, who spells his name fairly similar. So I apologize if I mispronounce that. But in that language, it's used to describe the plant of cannabis. And in the Oxford Dictionary, the word is also used to describe intoxication. So I love hearing about different slang words from around the world. I don't know, these are probably used a lot, but when we were younger, we would use herb, tree, things like that, green and stuff. So, but, BC Bud is kind of an interesting term that is used around the world to just describe really primo stuff. So it's kind of interesting there. The standard term we're going is tincture. And one of the slang words for tincture is the green dragon. It's made by soaking your weed in alcohol. Good idea to decarb it before you do it. The THC then dissolves into the alcohol. You can add it to drinks like the WYLIE drops that I did. You could take it directly. You could rub it on your skin. And tinctures were regularly used, cannabis tinctures were regularly used by doctors in the U.S. and the U.S. Pharmacological Society, or I guess, I don't know if that's the proper term, but until about 1942, and then different things evolved and they kind of went away from them. But they're really a really good way for people like me right now that can't do a lot of inhaling or don't want to. If people don't want to, you can drink your cannabis in a tincture and you can add it to lots of different things. I would just some personal advice. I would not add it to alcohol drinks. I don't think you should mix, cannabis with alcohol in a drink or food or anything like that. So I don't drink a whole lot anymore. I used to mix cannabis and alcohol a lot when I was younger, and I didn't really appreciate the cannabis as much because the alcohol content. So I wouldn't mix cannabis into your alcoholic drinks, but make your your Caesar, a non-alcoholic, a virgin Caesar, and pour some drops in there. I think you will enjoy the time a whole lot better. But again, I'm a little biased. That is me. So there you go. That is your weed words of the day.
This is the Cannabis 101 podcast. It's all part of the cannabis life experience. Turning the wheel of cannabis one toke at a time.
The lovely work of Christine Bandelow. Thank you so much to Christine and her husband, Kevin Dabbs, for... They do all the voice work for all of my shows, and great partners of mine as well, along with Stonesmiths. Here it is. I was talking about the slashers earlier. That's what it looks like. If you've seen Men in Black, you might not remember because maybe they used it on you, but a couple of clicks and boom, auto fire mode goes. That's the red, about 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And as mentioned, it's got a built-in loader. Mine is a little bit dirty because I haven't used this in a while because I haven't been inhaling, but there you go, the built-in loader. Such a cool device. And big thanks for the support that I've been able to get from Heath and Levi and Vince and everybody at Stonesmith. They have been wonderful. Check them out at stonesmith.ca. 3 temperature settings, and like I said, that auto fire mode is absolutely awesome. Hope you enjoyed this show, hour number 1 of episode 81. If you did, please subscribe. Leave us a review. Let us know what you think. If you're listening, that's great. Thank you very much. You could find us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you'd like to watch and see what the set looks like, especially when we do Know Your Buds and some different things, check us out on our YouTube channel, the Cannabis 101 Podcast on YouTube. Also, head to the cannabis101podcast.ca. Sign up for the Weed Weekly. That is our newsletter. Comes out every Friday, only for subscribers. And we spin the wheel of names. You could win a podcast prize pack there, but it is only for subscribers. So check that out, and you can find past episodes there as well. If you would like to become a partner of the show, please email me, cannabis101podcast@gmail.com. If you think you'd make a good guest, please hit me up as well. Not everybody can make it on, but we try to get as many people as we can. We're back again on hour number 2 on Wednesday. We're going to talk with Tyler Steger of Plant Life Canada, the Plant Life Guide. We will enjoy that. We will also have Chris Ianson, Regional Manager with Plant Life Canada, on Know Your Buds, and much more. Past episodes can be found at cannabis101podcast.ca, and for other shows of the sports variety, the draft and fantasy hockey, check out podcastalley.ca. Thank you so much to David WYLIE and MALKA LABELL, and of course to you, the listener and the viewer, our most important partner. Tune in on Wednesday, and individual segments will start coming out tomorrow. Thanks very much. Have a great week, and remember, it's not just about getting high. It's about getting healthy. We leave you with Marijuana from the artist My Dead Dog.